Hi, welcome to a Further Inquiry podcast. I'm Matthew Genorio, Editor-in-Chief of Further Inquiry. Further Inquiry is a place for playing gracefully with ideas. We are a reader-supported publication for free inquiry, brazen critique, and dissenting ideas.
Hi, and I'm Khadija Khan, a journalist and editor at A Further Inquiry. Matthew and I jointly host this podcast monthly. You can support our work by becoming a paid subscriber to A Further Inquiry today.
Hey, folks, we have joined once again on the AFI is Victoria. Victoria, how the heck are you?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here again. It was lovely last time, and I'm looking forward to Women Create, which is what I'm creating in the UK, which we'll be chatting about a bit later. So yeah, thank you for having me.
So for those of you who don't know about Victoria, which is not possible, but still, I'm going to introduce Victoria to you all. Victoria is a award-winning body painter, multimedia artist, and human women's rights activist, working with ex-Muslim for over a decade. And she is the founder of Women Create, the world's first ever event platforming female and feminist artists from across the political spectrum. You can find her at victoria.substack.com and Women Create at womencreate.co.uk. So here we go, Victoria. So we are so pleased to have you again on our podcast, and especially when we are going to discuss a lot about the event you're going to be hosting in London. So tell us about how's the life going on?
Thank you again for having me. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy here in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling. You would have assumed that after the Supreme Court ruling that everything would have been put to bed and that it would be okay for women to have spaces reserved for them. And actually, it's erupted into a riot across the UK based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the law. And while I'm creating, Women Create, which is platforming female and feminist artists, it's absolutely insane. So there's people saying this, like, women are still not entitled to their spaces and that they're still not entitled to have art exhibitions and gatherings that are dedicated to them. And there's still this fundamental misunderstanding and misinterpretation. So it's making things like really interesting. So I'm really excited to kind of get into the gubbins of this and really start talking about it, because it really has been this massive cultural eruption. So we're living in very interesting and exciting times, and it's making the creation of Women Create like so much more vital, I think. But it's still, to me, it's a real pleasure to be working on it, and it's something that I'm really living for at the moment, because there's so many women across the world. This isn't just for UK women, it's across the planet, where they've been cancelled, censored, silenced. We've got, women from Iran and also some people from Afghanistan as well who want to come along, Morocco, Sweden, because they're all being censored and silenced when it comes to talking about their rights and their creativity. So yeah, there's women artists being cancelled left, right and centre. And so now I'm creating something which is a parallel culture to the arts world, because no one else is going to do it. So I'm doing it. And it's exciting, it's thrilling. I'm meeting these phenomenal women. But oh my God, is it needed, especially now when you thought everything would have been sorted, and it's just not. Like, it's really quite something.
It's really interesting that I ask about how is the life going on, and you mentioned about the UK Supreme Court ruling about the definition of what a woman is. But that actually shows how this one issue impacts the lives of countless women, in living in this society, which is apparently a free democratic society, and people have their rights protected under the law of the land. Here we have the law that is telling us what is the definition of women, but still there is lots of confusion and hysteria, to be very honest, to say that there has been a hysteria about this ruling, and just trying to portray that this ruling as an infringement on the rights of transgender people, and it's somehow it's a kind of curtailment of their free speech. They cannot just express themselves. So for me, it's like, as you just said, that it's about women finding their voices and ways to prove their existence. And I think it's also tragic in this
Yes.
day and age, when women, they have to do it, when we think that we have made enormous, progress in terms of human rights, but still women, they cannot take it for granted, their rights. They
No.
have to just fight for them, whether they are living in a Western secular democracy.
No, you're absolutely right. And the thing is that the whole reason that this Supreme Court ruling came about is because, well, first of all, For Women Scotland brought it to the Supreme Court along with a lot of other people who were helping them. And it was done because there was a whole misunderstanding as to what the law actually entails. So the Equality Act 2010 was there to ensure there were single-sex provisions that were needed in times of crisis. So, for example, hospital wards and rape crisis centres and places where women will be vulnerable and they need, privacy, safety and dignity. And that was misinterpreted. So that's one element of it, but this is the crucial element for this. But that was misinterpreted by Stonewall law that anyone who identifies as a woman can then have access to these spaces. And so really the ire should be at Stonewall for misrepresenting the law, because the law has never been that anyone who identifies as a woman one day can then access these spaces. It's not actually true. But instead, everyone is treating this as the law has been overturned and this is a new ruling, and that anyone who identifies as trans has lost their rights. They haven't lost their rights. They, for example, like, you cannot be discriminated against in housing. You cannot be discriminated against in employment. If you are harassed or assaulted because of your perceived sex or because of your trans identity, then you are still protected in law. So essentially what's happened is we've just got clarification on single-sex spaces, and there's also this hyperbole going on about, oh, this is going to exclude trans people from everyday life. Well, actually, I don't think that's true at all, because you can easily have things like unisex toilets as well as male and female ones, and this means that, as long as these are provided, then no one's going to be excluded from anywhere. So, it's a lot of hyperbole, and at the same time, the people who are bearing the brunt of this are women. So we had lesbians being beaten up in Sheffield, I think it was, because they were saying that, they were standing up for their rights. So because this, prior to the Supreme Court going, actually, no, it does mean biological women, there's been men on lesbian dating apps. There's been sexual assaults in lesbian spaces and lesbians having to meet underground. So I'm a lesbian, and there's been times where we have not been able to meet, and we've had to meet underground at these different clubs in order to make sure that men weren't going to be in our spaces. It's, that is an impingement upon women's rights in a civil democratic society. Everyone should have a right to free association. Everyone should have their actual kind of provisions catered for in society in terms of essential services. Everyone should have the right to healthcare. But, these spaces are actually really important. They're important for lesbian life. They're also important for women. So, for example, you're going to a breast cancer group and then suddenly and it's meant to be for women, and then there's someone who's, clearly male who's in there. That's going to probably make a lot of women uncomfortable, and women have been self-excluding from things like rape crisis centres, also breast cancer support groups, the Lesh League. I mean, it's been a real, over the last, I think, at least a decade, it's been really tragic for women and their spaces, and where they need to go for their own healthcare and things. It's been really quite sad. But now, we have clarification in law, and now it's about making sure everyone is respected in a civilized society and making sure that these provisions are there for them. It shouldn't, this is the thing, it doesn't need to be an issue this aggressive. But there are some people in this, sadly, in the trans-identified contingent, that want it to be aggressive, and it doesn't need to be. It really doesn't.
I would like you to unpack, this one thing for our followers and audience who are very interested in this issue. Whenever we talk about women's safe spaces, it has been translated into somehow women are scared of trans women. They fear being attacked in women's spaces, so therefore they are fighting, or they are campaigning to protect women's safe spaces. So as far as I understand this whole issue, it's not about being attacked or having a fear of being attacked by anyone. It's about just women feeling safe and not being dealing with their day-to-day affairs. For example, they have to deal with their periods, they have to deal with their other things. We know that, what sort of things we would like to be comfortable with when we are in women's spaces. Just don't, as we don't want those men we love so much to be present in those spaces when we are dealing with our day-to-day routine stuff, the same way we don't want transgender women to be
Well, the thing is,
present there. It's not about like having a fear of being attacked. Yes, there has been, some examples.
yeah,
or
there's been a number of
incidents.
attacks.
Yeah, but it's not all about the fear of being attacked by someone. Like, if we don't want men to be present in those spaces, it doesn't mean that we are all the time having this fear that men are going to attack us.
I mean, for
So how do you
yeah. So for vulnerable women and for people who have already been attacked, it is an important safety issue for them. But for women who want to do particular things, so for example, a breastfeeding circle, that's generally a very female thing, because women breastfeed. And so having someone who is trans identified in the space, trans women start off like they're biologically male. And of course, I understand, like, I'm a detransitioner, so I understand dysphoria. I understand that there's different reasons for people wanting to transition. But at the same time, if it's a female space where they need to breastfeed, that's going to mean that women generally, if there's someone who is male-bodied or has made phenotypical alterations to themselves, generally that will lead to self-exclusion because so there's people who, like, for example, you would call them trans-identified males, I think, if you're a sex realist. The ones who do want to go into these spaces generally have not been good or hospitable to women. And so that's kind of reinforced the fact that there needs to be safeguarding. And that doesn't mean every single person on earth who identifies as trans is somehow a terrible person. It means that there's been instances where it has been shown demonstrably that women need these spaces, which are female only. And so this is why it's so important, because when you disrupt these spaces, whether it's a breastfeeding circle or a rape crisis support group or anything like that, when women start to self-exclude from public life, then that is a major, this is a searing indictment of, like a way of going backwards. It's a searing indictment of the current state of society where a very small minority of people, then their feelings have trumped women's for a decade and a half. And there's some women out there who've been fighting this for 20 years because they saw where this was coming from. And they saw how this would actually impinge upon women's lives. So there's even people in Brighton, Sarah Surviving, there's no provisions for female-only rape crisis centres. They all are trans inclusive. So she didn't feel comfortable and she didn't say, oh, you can't have a trans-only space to talk about rape. She thought that was perfectly fine. She was perfectly reasonable and said, I just want to have a space where it's just females only because I don't feel comfortable otherwise. And that's not her being bigoted. Her body is responding as a result of being a rape survivor. And she has every right, it's a human right, to be able to receive that therapy and that care. And now she's being dragged through the courts because of things like this. And, she's campaigning for female-only spaces because she doesn't have one. So, and that's why it's really important. So it's not just about fear, it is about privacy, safety and dignity, because we've now also got a voyeur issue in female changing rooms and toilets. There's been secret cameras installed, and there's also been there's been some really unsavoury things that have been happening in toilets as well. So we've got this whole thing where now we've got this huge epidemic. It becomes really important to reinforce these boundaries and to make sure women are being safe because, as a result of everything from, this trans issue all the way up to things like porn culture and stuff like that, women have been attacked left, right and centre. And like when you have 51% of the population being attacked and called evil and bigoted because they require same-sex provisions, something has gone terribly wrong with society. And I think it's really important that we've got clarity now with the Supreme Court ruling to say, actually, no, this is the law and this is how it should have been in the first place. Everyone else was basically misinterpreting it,
Yeah. You know what? That's, I've been keeping track of it through writings and it's just crazy. I mean, this is just, to me, this is just, as you say, to me, the fact of this podcast, the fact that you need to do the work you're doing, the fact that this ruling had to come about, to me, is mind-boggling.
Yeah. Well,
the cases are just crazy.
The cases are crazy. And the thing is, it's because, males who are adopting a trans identity are sometimes doing the absolute worst things. So we've had rapists in women's prisons. That's happened in the UK and the US. And these women who are incarcerated don't have anywhere to go. Like, they end up being sexually assaulted. You've had women even being in rape crisis centres. That's how bad these things have gotten. This is why we need single-sex provisions, and it's been reinforced now that we need single-sex provisions. There's other websites that are keeping track of these things as well, but the problem is because when I was identifying as trans, I was in these echo chambers, and the echo chambers are very, very hyperbolic, and everything talks about transgenocide, everything talks about how marginalised you are. All of the groups talk about how in danger you are all the time. And for anyone who is vulnerable, that creates an immense sense of panic. And it's irresponsible to do that, because there will be really vulnerable people in these spaces where they will believe it. And actually, and if someone does, assault someone because they believe them to be trans, I would never condone that. Because if you're just randomly punching somebody in the street just because you think they're trans, then I'm sorry, you deserve to go to prison just like everybody else does if they engage in common assaults. So, yeah, so it's...
I mean, the fact that we need to talk about even basic... I don't need... Well, it's biological, but basic, obvious basic things of a woman having the right to breastfeed her child in public and having that privacy to do that, or especially something I think from a male point of view that is not considered enough what it should be, is a natural bodily response. Someone who's a trauma victim response, not one. And of course, that's not a bigotry response. That's a natural biological trauma.
Exactly. Exactly.
These are obvious things. These are obvious, and to know that there is upheaval and these responses, as opposed to we put in our voices and we lost, the biology won over fiction, is absurd. The fact that I think my thing that I've been focusing on for so long with this issue seems to be from my perspective, it's a way of dismissing those who are gay and bisexual and lesbian. It's you know what? You're the old school. We don't want you anymore. You're not a part of this space. And I think to me, whether those who are listening don't like that, come at me. Here's a ticket to my ass, because for that thing, this is exactly the dismissing of my brothers and sisters who are across the political spectrum, who are not wanting to identify other than being I have a particular sexual orientation, but there's nothing about other content about me. There's nothing about my political views. There's nothing about my spiritual views, etc. It just happens to be biological. And this is, I find, most insidious about this.
Yeah, and it is insidious because the thing is, looking at it, there's a push, there are campaigns like LGBT Drop the TQ, and I understand why they occur, because with the queering of everything, the idea about the notion of, if you like, queer theory, and not everyone who identifies as queer will know about queer theory, because it's just kind of in the cultural water now in all these different clubs that, it's just queer. It's seen as more enlightened and more open-minded to be kind of like pansexual, or the opposite to that is asexual, and asexuality is usually from sexual trauma. It's not generally a natural thing. You very, very rarely get people called cold fishes, if you like, in really old school parlance, where you will have people who genuinely aren't interested in sex that much, but that's rare, because it's healthy to have a normal, healthy sex drive. So if there's asexuality, it's usually the result of things like sexual trauma and things like that. So you have these things where it's like, there's a push to be open to everyone, and then there's also this idea, people going, quote unquote, trans women can be lesbians. Well, 90 to 95 of trans women keep their penis, and lesbians don't do penis. And if you do penis, then okay, that's okay. But that does technically make you bisexual. If you're a woman who does penis and vagina. So there will be some people where they're lesbian, and they might come across the most phenotypically perfect trans woman they've ever seen in their life, right? Where there's no indication at all that they've ever been male, and they take estrogen, so they technically smell like a woman. And I'm sure there will be outliers that go, close enough. That will happen on occasion, because human beings and statistics, right? Just on the balance of probabilities, that's going to happen somewhere in the world at some point. But that's going to be the exception. It's not going to be the rule. Because lesbians... Oh, sorry.
We have this ruling now. We have defined what a woman is. But the question is, where are we heading, in the wake of this ruling? Because now we have seen that how this decision, which was like a very common sense decision that has to be told by the Supreme Court, that is ironic in and of self. But now we have this ruling, but then there is a hysteria around this, and there is this hyperbole that it's going to be discriminatory against trans people. And then we see the protest, and in that protest meant to be for those trans people who are feeling being excluded or being discriminated against. It was meant to be for them. However, we see that there are pockets in that protest which were very violent and calling for violence against women who are demanding women's only spaces be protected. So where are we going now when we see politicians, they are not brave enough or clear enough in their thinking that they can define what a woman means, and they need a ruling from the Supreme Court to be clear about this one thing. Yeah. So that is tragic, really, when we hear Keir Starmer. He's now very much clear about the definition of a woman. However, a few months back, he was really,
Yeah, I mean, he pushed Rosie Duffield out of the party. He was obscene to her, and he still hasn't apologised, even after the Supreme Court ruling. If you saw that...
So where are we heading now with this ruling? Because the politicians are not courageous enough to face the reality, the ground realities. And then we have this kind of protest, which are, where I see it as a problem, because we see that women, it's kind of like witch burning.
It is. Well, TERF is a new witch.
Black card. We have seen black card in this protest, and so for me, it's like calling for violence against women. It's just another misogynistic thing that we are.
It is, and the thing is,
at the moment.
Yeah, and so where are we going? I think the immediate kind of black humor answer I want to say is civil war, because it seems so bad.
Goodness me, we don't want that.
And I'm like, please, let's not have that.
This is the last thing.
Yeah, it's like, we don't need any more of this, please, no more.
Yes, exactly.
But the problem is, you have to realise, okay, again, not every person who identifies as trans will be predatory or will be aggressive, but there will be some who are really, really aggressive. And we have seen this, the way women have been booted off of Twitter, kicked out of rape crisis centres. With the Midra Wadra case, there was a case at the Edinburgh Rape Crisis Centre where women were not able to be seen if they were not okay with trans-identified males, and they were called bigots, and they were saying your bigotry would be challenged. That's someone who is a rape victim. Like, you are meant to be there for them, whatever prejudices they may have, or if they're worried. And also, not wanting to be seen by a trans-identified male or someone who would call themselves a trans woman is not bigotry. It's them being terrified and having a bodily reaction to someone who clearly is male-bodied. So in terms of where we're going, the aggressive contingent will continue to be more aggressive. And I've had this as well when I, basically when I came out as a lesbian, and because I only came out in 2022, I only found out in 2022. And, I've had this when I've, set up spaces for women, and when I've attended, feminist conferences, there's protests. There's, women in New Zealand have, at certain protests, have had their skulls fractured by the aggressive male contingent that is either a part of the trans-identified mob or supporting them. And there are some really bad actors who will be doing things because it's misogynistic and because they want to be aggressive and because they enjoy hurting and abusing women. And, I've had my own experience with that, because I was actually publicly raped by a trans-identifying male, and I started speaking about it in my Beyond Gender interview because people keep saying, oh, this never happens. And it does. And it's these types of people, men largely, some supporters, who will just want to still have access to female-only spaces because for them it's fun. For them, it's pleasurable. For them, they get off on boundary violation. And that's not to say every single person who identifies as trans would do that. But this is a contingent. And we need to understand that this is another reason why there's been such a pushback. Because it's this level of bad. And I see them getting more aggressive, and that being worse and getting worse, not better. And I was saying that in my, when I was speaking to Stella, that I think there's going to be greater reaction. So with LGB Alliance, for example, when they had crickets and things like that unleashed at the conference, I fully expect that there will be more retaliation like that. I fully expect that there's going to be more protests. I fully expect people to become more vicious who were whipped up in this, because it's not about trans rights. Underneath this, it's about male entitlement. And I can also understand how people who would deem themselves like old school transsexuals or deem themselves, dysphoric and then transitioning, to be really upset but also at the same time, they are not, like, those people are not the same as the predatory element that are going to be doing this damage, but they could be, whipped up in all of this.
Well,
So
Victoria, these are individuals. We can be worried or concerned about their behavior, and of course, we can criticize them. But as far as I'm aware, after the protest, there has not been made any arrest.
no
People
arrests.
who were calling for violence. So for me, it's like people who are committing criminal acts, they are criminals. So we cannot expect better than that. We know that what they are going to do. However, where is the law enforcement? Where do you see the role of politicians and the law enforcement in order to protect women from the violence, the potential, violence that's being called for by some trans activists?
Well, the thing is, like, for a while, they've been seen kind of almost like a sacred caste. Like, the myth around it is that they're the most vulnerable contingent in the world and they need to be protected at all costs. And with the Trans Day of Remembrance, for example, they extrapolate the figures for, I think, South America, and then extrapolate that through to the rest of the world. And actually, that's not true. Like, especially in the UK, people who are identifying as trans tend to be one of the safest contingents. So there's all this misinformation which has gone into the constabulary and the judiciary, also through Stonewall Law, also through gender ideology training, where they've been told that they're essentially a protected class and that you need to just do everything from respecting pronouns and, even for rapists, which has changed now, thankfully. And so this gender washing of the constabulary has meant that there's almost like a spell around it where they feel like they cannot make arrests. It's only now the Metropolitan Police, I think, have even said about, looking for the signs and the people who were kind of, calling for the death of women and incitement to violence. And all the previous protests where people have had, like, when men, trans-identified men, have had decapitate TERF signs, like, nothing's been done. And I don't see, like,
I think
unless
that's the most concerning part of this whole scenario, that when we see, even though the UK Supreme Court has ruled in the favor of women who want to have women's only safe spaces, still the law is not on their side. I would say law is on their side, but the law enforcement is not on their side.
Well,
it's kind of
unless
similar.
the law is implemented into actions. To be very honest, law is just
the law's being an
akin
ass.
to a piece of paper. Yes, it's just a piece of paper that amounts to nothing.
Well, it's the same with
here. So same thing in Canada. You have a comparison during the last nearly 10 years of Trudeau era. Same thing. I mean, not only himself, his members of cabinet and federal government officials wouldn't even use the word woman in a normal way. They would brush it off and saying, it's not our right to define this, as if it's some sort of new scientific discovery. And you had ample street protests where women, and I'd say women who, regardless of how they sexual orientation, but women, biological women, were attacked, threatened, harmed. Spaces were not permitted. I mean, it's a textbook example of how far it can go. I mean, you're not even as far as we were. And I think that I can give you an insight is where you're going is you're going to have, I just wrote a paper on this. So I wrote a paper on this for Queer Majority, you're going to have people who are otherwise voting or being perceived as conservative voters or being perceived as conservative because they're not aligning with quote unquote progressive people who aren't progressive, but they are regressive in their mindset. And I think it's for those people like Starmer. Starmer seems to pretty much being mirroring what the Trudeau policies and the Trudeau era here in Canada was, where it's a great way to either enable, either directly or indirectly, these groups, these people who are physically harmed, because it enables him and his party not to address real concerning issues of the country. It enables people to fight about things that are otherwise, whether it's physical, ideological fights, whether it's, of those natures, and then arguing about things instead of collectively fighting against something that they should be fighting for something. So it's a great way to distract.
Absolutely. And the thing is, Okay, so multiple things have happened here. First of all, Trudeau attached himself to this, I think, because it's an easy way to virtue signal and it was an easy way to get brownie points. And Starmer has done a very similar thing, but there's a very strong trans lobby-ish, if you like, with Labour. So there's like LGBT plus Labour, there's trans Labour. There was like Lloyd Russell Moyles, who was the one who harassed Rosie Duffield in Parliament, who was doing the conversion therapy bill and wanted to include trans. There's a very strong political contingent who've been pressuring Labour, and also there is left-wing misogyny. And if you say trans women are women and you supersede women's opinions because these poor trans women need more protection, then essentially what you're doing is using that virtue signalling in order to then quash women's voices, and that's been happening. And this is why Rosie Duffield left the party, because there was no way she could make any inroad. They just don't want to listen. And left-wing misogyny is more insidious than right-wing misogyny. At least right-wing misogynists go, yeah, we just don't think you should have abortions. At least you know what you're dealing with. But with the left-wing stuff, it's really nasty. And you're right in the fact they seem to be mirroring the policies. But I actually think it's like I think the indoctrination is actually far deeper in Labour than it is even with Trudeau. And I think the way they're talking about the Supreme Court decision now, it's weather vaning. I don't think they actually believe it. I think they know what a woman is, but they don't ideologically believe this should be the reality. And I think there was already a WhatsApp group, which was, all the Labour politicians going, okay, how can we just overturn this Supreme Court ruling? They were already working against it. And it's the same with the humanists. I think the humanists are already working against it. For what? Because women need their own sodding spaces. My God.
I think this is a very reckless effort to undermine this ruling.
Yeah.
Or the essence of this ruling. It's not about infringement of anyone's right. It's just about the definition. And to be very honest, we had Rio, the chief editor of Queer Majority magazine, and we discussed this with him. And his point of view was very interesting, that we have to make compromises. You cannot take women's rights away in order to assert another group's right.
Amen.
So
yep.
The compromises have to be made. And I think this is the point when we can reflect and we can seriously give it a consideration. How can we just move forward from this point? But as you just mentioned about Labour's politicians, MPs who are having this kind of, chit-chat on WhatsApp group. The Labour has said that it's not going to impact Labour's policies regarding this women's issue or women's safe spaces issue. And they have also said in Parliament that they are going to, they agree with this ruling, and they are just going to implement the ruling, in all the spaces, women's spaces from now onward. But there have been attempts to sabotage the women's rights, and there will be these efforts. My question is, you are going to host an event in London, you mentioned it earlier. Do you think that in this atmosphere you are going to get the support from the people, or what assurance you think that you can have from this ruling in order to, organize such an event which is going to platform women and those women who have been cancelled for their beliefs and views?
Well, I think it's reassuring to know the law is on our side. We knew it was anyway, but now it's just, now it's been reaffirmed. It's like, oh, thanks for that. So that's one thing. But already this, this is how hard, I'm going to tell you right now, this is how hard it's been to create Women Create. So this is a world first. No one has done an event exclusively for cancelled female and feminist artists from across the political spectrum. No one's done it. No one's mad enough to do it. So I was like, well, who's going to do this? Muggins here. So I started doing this. I had to go through, I kid you not, 300 venues. When I found one which was suitable, someone who was the DEI contingent of this venue tried to cancel us and called us transphobic. I'm not kidding. We had to go to, we had to talk. I was freaking out, and I had to go to Maya Forstatter and go, I'm so sorry, can you help me? Like, I was DMing. I was like, please, I have an issue. Can you help me? And she was so lovely. And she drafted a letter saying, you can't do that. It's against the law. And then they pulled back and apologized, and we got our booking back. But, it nearly didn't happen because of the pressure. Basically trans activists are putting on venues, and also will just take matters into their own hands. And because this was her decision, this was this DEI woman's decision, that, oh, we can't platform you because you're transphobic. Didn't even speak to anyone else on the board. Didn't go and ask about, oh, is this the right decision? She took it upon herself to just cancel the booking and not tell anyone. So that's the kind of thing we've been up against. I've also been called, obviously, like an evil bigot, TERF, transphobe, told to die in a grease fire and all of that
All
rubbish,
sort of
which
fancy.
usually happens. Yeah, the usual stuff. It's like, God, guys, I live in your head rent-free, can you not? And so we've had that. And also, I've had questions like, oh, well, are you platforming trans women? I mean, they're a protected class, they're in danger. It's like, look, no, actually, no, women are in danger. And women over the world, one of the biggest things I wanted to do with this is that when you look at any societal regression, so if you look at Afghanistan, for example, what's the first thing to go? It's women's self-expression. They are the canary in the coal mine. And that's why I was like, no, we need female activists here. We need women to be able to raise their voices and talk about matters which are really important to them, whether it's art, whether it's art activism, whether it's female representation in the arts, or how to make a better world for women. This has to go ahead. And every single time it's like, but you haven't got a trans woman on the panel. And it's like it's almost like people didn't think we were allowed to have a space for ourselves. And so that shows you the level of brainwashing that's happened in society, where people genuinely believe that a sex class cannot have an event just platforming them based on the issues around their sex. Like, there are some people still, right, in like certain kind of humanist groups, friend groups, things like that, they're still saying, oh, it's just so difficult to define what a woman is. Like, still, like, upper middle management guys saying, oh, it's so difficult to define what a woman is. Like, this has gone so much deeper than people realize. Right. And it's going to take a really long time to untangle this. Yeah, because it's insidious.
I think you're right in saying, whether it's in the UK, the US, wherever global you are, and you have a party that's not, I would say, not liberal, not on the left, on the, I don't want to say the fringe, is becoming so norm of this woke left, for lack of a better word. The means of diminishing, ironically, I thought about this earnestly, the means of diminishing class struggle. Because class struggle as a means of actually, you might not get the outcome you want, but the class will. People will actually fight something. And it turns out the working class don't want what a lot of people, labor people want. But if you can get people to fight over things that are endless, that really don't have that are philosophical as they are biological, then you can manipulate, you can pull the strings, and you can distract. Primarily, you can distract them from the real issues, from the real concerns that affect them on a national level, beyond demographics, beyond sex and gender. And if you get them to figure out this, then there's the entrapment.
Very true. I have to say as well, this became a struggle for survival for women. And that's the problem. It started off something that was, quite small and insidious. Actually, this was going on, I think, even in the 1970s. So Janice Raymond wrote a book called The Transsexual Empire about, actually, this could go really wrong. And it turns out she was right. So the radical feminists have known about this for a long time. So, kudos to them. So they saw where this could go. It's become an existential threat to women's lives based on the fact that women have been brutalized so badly. There was even a lesbian march in Berlin where lesbians turned up going, we're lesbians, we don't do penis, and had, signs up. They were beaten up by men in dresses, like physically beaten.
I think this is the problem with, exactly. I mean, this is the problem with this issue, that people, they don't want to sit down around the table and just talk about how to just resolve this issue. It's just like asserting my rights, exactly. And women, they have to give up, because women have done it, like for centuries they have done it. They have compromised their own rights in order to, protect the family, and now protect the men's, authority. Like, it's women's, duty, for somehow divine duty, that she's been created to compromise her own places, her own rights, in order to protect the society, family, blah, blah, blah. I think it's high time to treat women as an equal member of the society, who has the right to have her places or her rights protected under the law of the land. And the law is on the side of women, and it's not that law is against trans people. This
Yeah.
needs to be made clear that this law is not in infringement on anyone's right. This has just made one clarification that was very much needed in order to move from this stagnant point where we have all
Yes.
been stuck for so long. So now we have we have been equipped by the law just to move forward and do the right thing for
Yeah.
the women who have been discriminated against for just believing that a woman is a woman who is born
Mm-hmm.
as a female.
Yeah.
I think that has been a fascinating discussion with you, Victoria, as always. And we wish you all the best for the event you are going to host in London. And I think this ruling, and in the wake of this ruling, this event is going to make a huge impact
Thank
on
you.
the ongoing narrative
Absolutely.
around this ruling.
Yeah.
So we wish you all the best, and it's been always a pleasure to have you. in
Likewise,
AFI
thank you for having me
podcast.
on. I just want to say before I go, I actually would like women to be liberated from male violence and oppression. I also think, we need to go further than equality. We need to make sure that male violence is actually, properly seen as a criminal issue, whether that's male sexual violence or just general violence. And that's also one of the reasons why I wanted to just platform women, because we are also platforming survivors, we are platforming detransitioners, we are platforming women with all these different experiences, because nobody else will. And if you want to come along, it's womencreate.co.uk. You can have a look there. We're also on Eventbrite as Women Create, and you can get your tickets. We have concession tickets as well, which start from £8.50. From those from a limited income. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And we just have to keep going, because it's not going to be over. And we've really got to realize that, women are actual full human beings, and they have a right to express themselves. They have a right to freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, and they have a right to keep creating, and they have a right to live free of male violence and oppression. And that's why Women Create is here, because we are that culture now. That's what we're creating. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Victoria.
And we will
Thank
put
you,
the links
Matthew.
we put the links to the event in the post. We'll put it
Yes.
on our socials as well. You have to say, Victoria, do whether yourself during the event, after it, please do submit some insights into it, photos. We'd love to have a publication from this event and showcase it on the AFI Substack.
Oh, amazing. Yes, absolutely.
I think
Thank
it'd be
you so
brilliant.
much.
No, absolutely.
Brilliant.
This is
It's a
this is a
pleasure.
must needed event, and I hope it's
Yes.
the first of many to come.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much. Cheers.